This story is entitled Three Friends, a Game. I want to tell you about a game I used to play called Three Friends. I played this game with my cousins Graham and Anna, who were both close to my age. Every time I stayed over at their house where they lived with my Uncle Tommy. Anna's best friend Emily would usually join us, or Graham's friend Phil, who lived next door, but they could not both play simultaneously, as there had to be exactly 4 players, at least when each game began. The origins of this game are vague, as I told the police later. None of us could quite remember who had told us about it, or if we had sort of invented it ourselves, maybe based on an older game or some Halloween tradition. We had been playing it since we were perhaps 7 or 8, and we always played when I visited. Uncle Tommy lived in an old farmhouse where they had once bred horses, in a sparse rural sort of town. He had bought the place for a song after some sort of incident there when the previous owner had been jailed for murdering his daughter, then freed on appeal before shooting himself somewhere on the property. My parents always had reservations about Uncle Tommy, as he was sort of a free spirit, one of those rare people who grew up older but never stopped being cool. He worked as some sort of freelance photographer and played drums in several bands, and was a huge fan of weird-sounding 1970 progressive rock groups. I always got on well with Anna and Graham, who were the sort of siblings who were at each other's throats one minute, then best friends the next. Emily was sweet, and Phil was sort of a clown, but genuinely funny. To play the Three Friends game, you need a room which contains 3 specific things: a fireplace or furnace, a mirror which we called a scry, which sort of refers to using a mirror to tell the future, and a window which could be opened. Uncle Tommy's basement had all of those things. The window was at ground level, about 5 feet from the floor, and just about large enough to squeeze through. To prepare for the game, you must perform 3 symbolic acts. Each player must breathe onto the mirror to show you have life. Then each player must scratch or prick themselves on the open window pane, which fortunately for us was old and full of splinters. This was to show that your blood flowed, which I guess is a vitality thing. And then you must write down every player's name on a scrap of paper and burn it in the fire. But you must ensure that the embers have completely burnt out before playing, as it must be absolutely pitch black in the room when the light is switched off. This is another reason why a basement is ideal. There can be no light whatsoever. Oh, and I guess there needs to be a light switch in the corner of the room, but this would apply to most rooms, right? To begin, everyone would stand still in a corner, facing the wall, with the person standing closest to the light switch ready to flick it off. Then, simultaneously, you all must chant, "Out of the ashes, out of scry, out from the portal that bleeds into the night. Won't you come join us, my 3 friends and I? I'll turn out the lights in case you are shy." And with the word shy, which everyone would inevitably shout in emphasis, the light would be turned off. And each player must make their way to a different corner of the room in total silence, or as close as possible, and face the wall again. You can obviously feel your way around, and if you bump into someone on your travels, or reach your choice of destination to find someone there already, you must negotiate this obstacle without any communication whatsoever. When everyone is satisfied that the task is complete, you all stomp your foot from each corner of the room to sort of signal to the other 3 that you are there. Then, the light switch is flipped by whoever stands near it, and you all call out your name to confirm you are still there. But not turn around, as this ends the game. Presuming your 3 friends are still present, and only your 3 friends, you can breathe a sigh of relief and play another round if you dare. You should only ever hear the names of your 3 friends called each time you play, provided you follow the 3 simple rules. No talking at all in the darkness. No light until a friend is safely in each corner, and you must always be a good friend. This third rule is obviously open to interpretation. If someone does break a rule, then the game is instantly over and the light can be flicked back on. However, one of two things will have happened, and I'm not sure which is worse. Either you will be in that room with 2 friends, or you will be in that room with 4. We would play this game for as long as we could, which was usually until Uncle Tommy shouted down the stairs that Emily or Phil had to leave, and myself, Anna, and Graham had to go and get ready for bed. This was usually pretty late though, as Uncle Tommy was that one cool relative who most people seem to have. He'd let us eat too much junk food and drink all the soda we wanted, and he was ridiculously laid back when it comes to allowing us to watch horror movies from his huge collection. Nothing too extreme. We're talking the Friday the 13th series, Halloween, that sort of thing. He left us to our own devices in the basement while he had a beer and listened to classic rock bands in the living room, the walls of which were covered in big, gaudy paintings of horses which had come with the property, some of which seemingly painted by a child. Sort of gave me the creeps. There was usually a distinctive smell in that room too, which I was too young to recognize at the time. So, whenever I stayed over, we would kill time until it got dark, which took an eternity in the summertime, and play this game over and over. It never seemed to get boring. I guess it had similar appeal to games like Bloody Mary, in that we didn't actually want anything bad to happen, and yet the lingering taste of danger was what gave the game its spark. We were constantly stifling laughter and screams as we stumbled into each other in the dark. And it is surprisingly how clearly our mutual panic could be heard in the blackness. With every anxious footstep and ragged breath. Let's face it, basements are always creepy, which certainly helped with the atmosphere. And it became a running joke that during our chant, someone would start speaking in a dumb horror voice, like Freddy Krueger or Chucky from Child's Play. You can see why it was such good fun and not taken entirely seriously, despite how inherently creepy it was. Just to clarify, as it may cause confusion to the uninitiated, even though this game is for 4 players, its name refers to how each player has 3 friends with them. But sometimes, there were signs that a 4th friend had joined each of us. The embers of the fire would flare for a few moments, or a gentle sigh would be heard near the mirror, resulting in fading condensation on its surface as the light was switched on. Often there would be a rapping on the open window pane. But all of these things could have easily been caused by 1 or 3 of the friends kicking at the fire or breathing quickly on the mirror as they passed. And none of those things occurred on the one time the game went horribly wrong. It was around Halloween, and I was about 11 years old. I sensed that this visit to Uncle Tommy's house might be our last chance to play the game, as deep down I sensed that I was growing too old for stuff like this. We all were. And indeed, we would never play it again, though not for the reason I had anticipated. So I hatched a plan to give my 3 friends a good scare and end the game in style. Emily was around that day to complete our team of 4 players, but I was determined that just once we would be joined by a 4th friend that night. So after dinner, I sneaked out of the house and headed over to ask Phil if he fancied joining us in a prank. Knowing he wouldn't need much convincing, he agreed to sneak over at about 7 o'clock and hide quietly outside the basement window as we began the game. He was to wait until the 3rd round and then slip stealthily down into the basement and creep into a corner before everyone could take their new places in the dark. Simple, or so it seemed. So we played the first couple of rounds, and I was buzzing with anticipation when we began to chant for the 3rd time. Graham was speaking in a really bad Bela Lugosi accent, and Anna was putting on an impressive Skeletor. But I thought I heard something else underneath the 4 voices, which didn't sound like any of my 3 friends. It was drowned out a little, but sounded like a cross between a throaty laugh and a horse neighing, a sort of screechy, slightly mocking. But the light went out, and I didn't really have time to process anything except how to negotiate the dark room without somehow bumping into Phil and ruining everything. Phil was always the worst player, forever crashing about, banging his shin on things and yelping. He had the grace of a drunken elephant. However, he seemed to have pulled this prank off in style, as it soon became obvious that although someone was occupying each corner, one person was still scampering around. As they grew near, I could tell it was Emily. From her footsteps and the sound of her breath, the way you can always recognize a friend or a loved one with little clues and signals, she grabbed at me and then moved on and circled the room. But the second time she came around, she sounded stressed, and this time she touched my face with both hands and patted my head as if she was convincing herself who I was. I felt a little guilty, to be honest, listening to her breath grow more ragged and her steps become quick. Someone giggled, but I didn't recognize the voice. And then there was silence again. Emily had stopped still near the center of the room. I could almost taste a strange anticipation in the air. Things were different this time, and everyone seemed to have realized as such. And there was an odd smell, too, which I guess had drifted in from one of the farms nearby, an animal smell, like a wet dog. I stamped my foot. 2 others did the same. And then there was a dull clump of a horse's hoof on the wooden floor from the corner opposite mine. Emily spoke, her voice wavering as if she was on the verge of tears. I don't want to play this anymore. The light flickered on, and I realized I had not breathed for 15 or 20 seconds. Everyone exhaled, everyone present. I spoke my name. Graham and Anna spoke theirs. We turned to the other corner, but there was no one there. Phil had decided against entering the basement through the window that evening, as he figured it was dangerous to jump down into the darkness. He wasn't wrong, to be fair. He told me afterwards that all the horses on his family's farm had been acting crazy that evening, charging about and kicking over fence posts as if something had terrified them. I never went back to visit Uncle Tommy. I only saw him once again at a family funeral about 4 years later. Anna and Graham were there, but we didn't speak. They seemed to be avoiding me. Everyone seemed to blame Uncle Tommy for what happened. The general consensus was that he must have learned about the game from an old occult book, since he apparently had some volumes on things like tarot cards and healing crystals, that sort of thing. Nobody really thought that he had meant for us to get hurt. He had just wanted us kids out of his hair while he took drugs and listened to his weird bands. I think that's unfair, and I don't blame him for anything. I'm certain he never ever would have encouraged us to play any sort of dangerous game. He was a good guy, and I miss him. I did find out later that his all-time favorite album was 3 Friends by an obscure band called Gentle Giant, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I think that we all invented the game, gradually, as friends. It was just a quick scare, a cheap thrill, the sort of thing all kids do. Anna and Graham had a few problems over the years, but Uncle Tommy was hit the hardest. He lost his job, and that old house we had enjoyed so many good times fell quickly into disrepair. Neighbors began to see him less and less, especially when his kids left home. Nobody found his body for nearly a month, laid dead in the center of the basement. Anna and me began to exchange emails. Graham thought all computers were tools the government used to upload conformist data directly into your brain. But Anna knew his address and was pretty sure she could convince him to come home for one night. She told me her dad had begun to stomp around the small subterranean room until the sun rose, screaming for answers, begging for Emily to be returned. He was too good of a guy to rope anyone into playing that game with him, though, and that is presumably the only way to make contact. To try to make a trade, to roll the dice, to make things better or worse, to do something. We knew we had to try, for our third friend, Emily, and for Uncle Tommy. I can't hide from that basement all of my life. It has consumed me for long enough, trapped down there, stumbling through the darkness. I broke the rules once. I'm not afraid to break them again. Phil has long since moved away and won't return emails. I can't say I blame him. It's not his fault. None of this is his fault. Tonight, we will play Three Friends game again. But we need a third friend, someone who knows all the rules. Why else do you think I was telling you all of this? Are you interested?